Right, I'm delighted to introduce our final speaker for this session, Sara Khan. Sara is someone who has dedicated her life to making the world a fairer and better place for everyone, regardless of race, gender, or religion. In 2008, she co-founded Inspire, an organization committed to tackling gender inequality and Islamist extremism. She wrote about these challenges in depth in her 2016 book, The Battle for British Islam, Reclaiming Muslim Identity from Extremism. In 2008, she was appointed by the Home Secretary to lead the Commission for Countering Extremism. Please welcome Sara Khan.
Thank you. It's 2018 I was appointed, not 2008. It's fine. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Keith and to Stephen for inviting me to speak at this conference. But I also just want to thank NSS for the contributions that they make to our civil society and to our country. A healthy democracy requires a healthy and diverse civil society. And NSS's work in standing up for religious freedom, but also in exposing and tackling religious extremism through the prism of human rights is much needed. So thank you for all that you do. The theme for today's conference, that of reclaiming religious freedom, is both welcome and timely. It can often feel that there is no other option but to accept the view that there exists a deep tension between religious freedom and equality and human rights. Take the ongoing and live situation, as both Pragna and Yasmin have indicated, where we've seen clashes between schools seeking to teach equality, including LGBTQ rights, and parents who believe homosexuality is a sin. While there are those who seek to convince us there exists an inevitable clash between religious freedom and human rights, my message today is we must refuse to accept this binary discourse. Instead, we must build common ground and alliances. In this speech, I will set out why I believe the onus is on us, on those of us who want to protect our fundamental freedoms, our rich diversity and democratic way of life, to challenge extremism whenever it raises its ugly head, including when it manifests within religious communities. And we must do so without fear of upsetting religious sensibilities, but to do so through respectful and meaningful dialogue, and by celebrating our equality and pluralism. That means we have to celebrate religious freedom too, and the positive contribution it makes to our society. Extremism is a global challenge. Freedom of religion is under threat by extremists. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights demands for freedom of religion to be protected, including the right for people to observe and manifest their religion, and to change or leave their religion is being denigrated and undermined every day. We have seen horrific killings and brutal attacks on people from across the world because of who they are, what they believe or don't believe, and how they choose to live. The murder of Jews in San Diego and Pittsburgh, the killing of Muslims and Christians in Christchurch and Sri Lanka, respectively. In China, the ruling party have incarcerated up to 1.5 million Muslims in what can only be described as concentration camps. In Saudi Arabia, a ban on non-Muslim public religious observance continues. And our own country is by no means immune to both the threat to religious freedom and of religious extremism, where we see religious believers are not only victims of extremism, but they can often be guilty of perpetuating extremism themselves. My commission is seeking to better understand the threat of extremism and finding better ways to challenge it. We are doing this in what I think are challenging times for our country, both socially and politically, as Nick outlined earlier. We were formally launched as an independent body a little over a year ago. Prior to my role as lead commissioner, I co-founded and ran a leading counter-extremism organisation called Inspire. I've had 10 years' experience of running an NGO which brought me face-to-face with extremist groups, their relentless propaganda and disinformation, and active attempts to shut down debate. I spoke to countless victims of extremism and experienced how extremists target those who stand up to them. My experience taught me where the gaps exist in our current counter-extremism response, but it also gave me an insight into how extremist groups operate, who they target and why, the multiple harms extremists cause to individuals and our society, and the urgent need to develop a meaningful, multi-pronged and whole society response. I also know what it feels like to be targeted by extremists, where my identity and beliefs has resulted in abuse and threats from Islamists, the far right, and hard left extremists. Puritanical in their monolithic worldview, Islamists do not accept my brand of Islam and see me as a threat to the type of society they would like to create. Being a Muslim woman who subscribes to democratic ideals, human rights norms, and who refuses to conform to the demands of preachers so frequently placed on women, has often placed me in the out group, worthy of abuse and denigration. And perhaps, just perhaps, there is something about a gobby, opinionated and stubborn Yorkshire lass that particularly irks Islamists. At the other spectrum, the far right throw hate at me by virtue of being Muslim. They assume I must secretly hold Islamist tendencies, that I am sympathetic to jihadis, and that I aspire to bring down all of Western civilization overnight. No matter what I say or do, in their eyes, I will always be one of them, a Muslim, and who should therefore be opposed at all costs. And then there's the far left. They don't believe I'm the right kind of Muslim, both religiously or politically. If I'm not screaming anti-American tropes or anti-Western narratives, then my identity as a Muslim is meaningless, despite my equality and human rights work. In fact, I can now be a legitimate target for abuse and racism, even from so-called anti-racists. I've lost count the number of times I, as a Muslim woman, have been labelled an Islamophobe, not only from Islamists, but from far-left non-Muslim activists. Peak Muslim-splaining, if I ever saw it. So I've experienced firsthand how religious expression and freedom is denigrated, despised, and trampled on. A little bit about the Commission's work. Over the course of the year, I visited 15 towns and cities across England and Wales to see for myself how extremism is presented at a local level. In each area, I've spoken to practitioners working for councils, in education, and for NGOs. I've spoken to local politicians, to the police, to the media, to faith leaders, activists, and residents. We've also held a series of expert workshops and roundtables and engaged with those who are not only concerned about extremism, but are also worried about the impact of counter-extremism policy. And this includes religious groups and free speech advocates, including the Defend Free Speech Alliance, of which NSS is a part of. We also launched the first ever public consultation on extremism in this country and received nearly 3,000 responses. So thank you to all of you in this room, including the NSS, who contributed, and we will be publishing the outcomes shortly. We are currently pulling together significant government data on extremism and have commissioned 30 academics to write research papers on topics including the far right, Islamist and far left extremism, online extremism, a critique of current counter-extremism responses, and possible alternatives. We're bringing all of this evidence together for a study into all forms of extremism, which will be presented to the Home Secretary in the next few months. It's worth discussing at this point what we mean by extremism. In our terms of reference for the study, we outlined several different definitions, including the government's. It's no surprise that some are cautious of the term. Historically and in the present day, the term has been abused and exploited. Suffragettes campaigning for the right to vote were declared extremists by the state 100 years ago. Today we see how authoritarian rulers seek to silence their critics and opposition by labelling them as extremists. Some even use the argument of counter-extremism to justify human rights violations. I mentioned China and Saudi Arabia earlier. The former justifies its incarceration of Muslims in order to stem the so-called and alleged threat of Islamist extremism. The latter declared all atheists as terrorists under anti-terror laws. This is utterly unacceptable and are grave human rights violations. More commonly, in our own society, extremism is used as a lazy insult, or is used, abused, and misused deliberately to smear legitimate opponents and their views. This is harmful and counterproductive, not least to vital counter-extremism work, and I believe it's important that we use this word with great care, which is why one of the issues we're examining in depth as part of our study is the public's perception of extremism and where they consider the boundaries to be. We're also looking at the impact of extremism. Experts, practitioners, and the public see extremism as manifesting in different ways. Many see it in radicalisation, violence, and terror. And this is understandable. The appalling attacks in Pittsburgh, Sri Lanka, Christchurch, and San Diego, for example, were carried out by killers who all subscribed to extremist ideologies and beliefs. Extremism, however, is a spectrum, and it manifests both violently and non-violently. We see a patchwork of dangerous individuals and groups who, though they may not support terrorism, do spread hatred and hostility at a defined outgroup. and are all too ready to intimidate, ostracize, and threaten in the name of their cause. We're also witnessing a worrying mainstreaming of intolerance and prejudice. And these different phenomena are all linked by ideas, networks, and the harm they cause to individuals, communities, and wider society. And I'd like to pick up on three important themes: mainstreaming and the harms of extremism and how we respond. Having travelled across the country and gathered a significant amount of evidence and data, I am concerned we are seeing rising intolerance, polarisation, and extremism. The centre ground is under threat, and the boundaries that kept extremist behaviour and beliefs are being eroded. I'm worried that the mainstream is becoming a more hospitable place for extremist attitudes and behaviour, and this is borne out by many different stats. Take hate crime figures, which show a rise in race and religiously motivated attacks, and in the many conversations I've had with academics, experts and activists up and down the country. Hope Not Hate polling shows 47% of the British public think there are no-go areas in Britain where Sharia law dominates and non-Muslims cannot enter. 2018 was the third year in a row that CST has recorded a record high in anti-Semitic incidents. One poll by YouGov and the University of Cambridge suggests that 60% of the British public believe at least one conspiracy theory about how the country is run or the veracity of information they have been given. Further research also suggests that conspiracy theories are cumulative, where when someone subscribes to one, they are likely to subscribe to others. Conspiracy theories are a staple diet of extremist activity, not least on social media, which has helped propagate extremist propaganda in a way we have never seen before. Combine this with the overwhelming scale of disinformation online, and it truly is quite frightening. Experts argue that traditional extremist rhetoric usually remains outside of the so-called cordon sanitaire, but a shift has occurred in our society, where racism, anti-Muslim bigotry, anti-Semitism, for example, have found their way to the boundaries, where death threats and harassment of politicians is becoming a regular occurrence, where journalists are intimidated and abused, and when political parties themselves lack the leadership to enforce the cordon sanitaire. This poses a threat to our country and to our democracy. This raises important and difficult questions about how and why we are seeing these shifts in public attitudes. We've received evidence of how hate and bigotry occur within a community because individual identity is not respected. In parts of Jewish, Hindu, Muslim and Sikh communities, we heard the same depressing story of threats, intimidation and ostracizing of people within the same faith community simply because they choose to exercise their own agency of what to believe, who they love and how they dress. At a societal level, the Local Government Association, in its submission to our call for evidence, for example, described how extremism can disrupt the life of entire local communities, affecting businesses and deterring residents and visitors from going out to their town centres. Many organisations, including the NSS, were clear that when extremism takes hold, all of society suffers. It undermines our democracy, community cohesion, our fundamental freedoms and rich diversity. I want to develop a new way of looking at the harms of extremism, and we're currently doing that in terms of developing a typology of harms with King's College Institute, which is currently not reflected in current counter-extremism policy, but will help shine a light on the victims. So how do we respond? Well, I believe we need a whole society response and a better, more nuanced counter-extremism toolkit. The government's 2015 counter-extremism strategy has driven work at a local and national level, including creating the network of local coordinators and funding some vital community work and civil society groups. But we have to ask, has the strategy itself kept pace with the changing threat of extremism? Does it acknowledge the complexity of the harms? And does it give us the toolkit of responses we need? And how can we make sure we do this in a way that does not undermine the human rights principles that are vital for the well-being of our democratic society? But challenging extremism isn't just a job for government. It's crucial that we all stand up and speak out. I have been inspired by the brave stories of individuals and groups, many of them just ordinary members of the public, who have stood up to hatred and extremism. I've met many unsung heroes who are the backbone of our country, demonstrating unrelenting courage, often receiving more abuse than support. I have seen the power of community-based collaborative and innovative interventions, whether it was using music to draw young people away from the far right, or an imam combining his knowledge of the Quran and social media to challenge Islamist narratives. As many counter-extremists have told me, and through my own experience of running a civil society organisation, I know we need a strong network of support, including emotional support and long-term and sustainable funding. Countering extremism isn't just about countering negative beliefs and attitudes. It's also about upholding and promoting our democratic norms and principles, which are under threat by extremism. It's about championing and embedding in our society our values of individual liberty, pluralism, inclusion, and human rights. It's these principles that extremists oppose, attack, and seek to denigrate, which is why we must live by these principles and hold on to them ever more fervently in the face of extremism. Some of the most active counter-extremists I've met have been secularists, who have shown persistence and commitment in standing up for these values, including for religious believers who are being targeted by religious extremists. It's not easy work, and I know as a result many secularists have suffered abuse and threats. This is even more the case if you are of faith and a secularist. It's amazing how so many people erroneously believe that you can't be both. The Commission stands with you in your commitment to countering extremism. And like secularists, I've also met many faith organisations who are inspired by their faith to contribute positively to our country. Faith leaders and activists who are on the front line encountering religious extremist propaganda, where extremists distort the teachings of their faith to promote hatred and who seek to build religious literacy. They promote how faith is compatible with human rights and equality norms, using religious arguments why such principles should be upheld. And they do this through the prism of their religious teachings. They play an important role in countering extremism and reforming those who hold religious extremist beliefs, and can provide solutions and interventions in a way where governments and other institutions are unable. I believe both secularism and faith can play an important role in building resilience and challenging extremism, promoting respect and dignity for each other. But this requires dialogue. As a strong advocate of freedom of expression, I believe countering extremism, and especially the mainstreaming of intolerance, requires more and not less debate. As I mentioned earlier, I've met academics and practitioners testing out innovative ways to challenge ideas and change attitudes. Only recently, I've shown a powerful example of how to bring together young people in far-right and Islamist circles for mediated dialogue. I've spoken to youth workers who stress on the need for safe spaces to discuss difficult subjects, including racist views. Too often, these important discussions slip into personal attacks or non-negotiable positions, or worse, we shut them down. This brings me back to the wider issue of reclaiming religious freedom. Often, the discourse between religious believers and secularists is a hostile one, each suspicious of each other's motives and work. There will be lots of issues both sides won't agree on, but there will be other issues that can be agreed on. And I would like to see a positive spirit of dialogue on both sides. Dialogue, I believe, has to be the first step in any counter-extremism effort. It's easy to find yourself trapped in an echo chamber, both online and offline, but the simple act of meaningful and respectful dialogue and debate is an essential tool in building understanding and finding a common ground. This is by no means the easy option, but I believe it results in some of the most positive and fruitful outcomes. This is essential if we want to break the silo of echo chambers, so I'd like to see more debate, more dialogue, more speech, not less. So in a time of polarisation, anger and hate, how do we push back against those that create intolerance? We do so by guarding the cordon sanitaire, by standing firm and upholding our fundamental freedoms, our democratic way of life, our diversity and pluralism, which extremists despise, by taking a consistent and proactive approach to all forms of extremism, by rediscovering and engaging in dialogue, to avoid rising to the bait that extremists like to wave in front of us. We must do more to challenge and counter all forms of extremism. And it's a responsibility on all of us as individuals, families, teachers, local authorities, faith leaders and governments. It requires a whole society response. It requires building alliances. And it's down to all of us to rise to this ever-growing challenge. Thank you.